The city was alive, bustling with energy, its streets echoing with the sounds of honking cars, vendors shouting to sell their goods, and people rushing to their destinations. Among this chaos, on a cold winter evening, sat a man whose presence went unnoticed by most, a homeless man named Daniel. His dark skin glistened faintly under the dim light of a street lamp, his tattered coat doing little to shield him from the biting cold. Daniel sat hunched over, his calloused hands wrapped tightly around a cup of lukewarm coffee, the only warmth he had known that day. Daniel had once been a man with dreams, like everyone else. Born into a poor family, he had struggled his entire life to make ends meet. Despite working multiple jobs, one stroke of bad luck after another had led him to this moment. A sudden illness, mounting debts, and eventually the loss of his job had stripped him of everything he owned. Now the streets were his home, and the world moved past him as if he were invisible. He gazed at the busy crowd, his stomach growling from hunger, his body aching from a night spent on the hard pavement. The sight of well-dressed people walking by with bags full of food and gifts was a cruel reminder of how different his life was. Yet despite his struggles, Daniel held on to a quiet dignity. He refused to beg. Instead, he did odd jobs when he could, scraping together just enough to survive another day. Daniel's isolation was palpable. The cold wasn't just physical, it was the loneliness that gnawed at him, the absence of a friendly face or a kind word. It had been months since he'd had a meaningful conversation with anyone. His only companions were the pigeons that pecked at crumbs near his feet and the occasional stray dog that sought shelter by his side. As he sipped the last drop of his coffee, a thought lingered in his mind, one he often told himself on the darkest nights. Kabhi kabhi zindagi mein ek choti si kindness pura kismat badal sakti hai. Little did he know, his life was about to change in ways he couldn't have imagined. It was nearing sunset, and the chilly breeze had grown sharper, cutting through Daniel's worn coat like a blade. He shifted on the cold pavement, trying to find some comfort against the unforgiving concrete. His stomach growled, but he had grown used to the hunger. He was about to close his eyes and drift into another restless evening when he noticed a commotion a short distance away. An old lady stood at the edge of the street, frail and visibly disoriented. She clutched a small handbag and a walking cane in one trembling hand, while the other hand attempted to pick up a paper bag that had fallen to the ground. The bag appeared to have burst open, spilling its contents, some fruit and a loaf of bread, onto the dirty pavement. People hurried past her, too preoccupied to notice, or perhaps pretending not to. The city had a way of hardening people to such sights. Daniel observed her for a moment. She looked exhausted, her face pale and lined with years of life's battles. The tremble in her hands suggested she might be unwell, and her confusion was evident as she glanced around, unsure of what to do. Daniel hesitated. His own body ached with fatigue, and he had nothing to offer but himself. Still, something stirred within him, a faint voice reminding him of his own humanity. With a deep breath, he rose to his feet, brushing off the dust from his ragged clothes. He approached her cautiously, not wanting to startle her. "Ma'am," he said gently, crouching down to gather the scattered fruit. "Let me help you." The old lady looked at him with surprise, then relief. "Oh, thank you, dear. These hands of mine aren't what they used to be." Daniel carefully placed the fruit back in the bag, doing his best to secure the tear with a piece of string he found in his pocket. He handed it to her with a kind smile. "You should be careful, ma'am. These streets can be unforgiving," he said, noticing how frail she appeared. "Are you all right? Do you need help getting somewhere?" She sighed, leaning on her cane. "I was on my way home, but I seem to have lost my way. My eyesight isn't as sharp anymore, and these streets all look the same to me." Daniel nodded. "Where do you live? I can help you find your way." She hesitated for a moment, as if debating whether to trust him. But his genuine concern and lack of hesitation melted her doubt. She mentioned a small neighborhood a few blocks away. "Come on, I'll take you," he offered, walking beside her to ensure she didn't stumble. As they walked, the old lady spoke softly. "You're a kind soul. Most people wouldn't have stopped to help. What's your name?" "Daniel," he replied simply, "just trying to do what I can." She smiled warmly. "Well, Daniel, the world could use more people like you." Her words lingered in his mind, filling a void he didn't realize he had. For a fleeting moment, the cold didn't seem so bitter, and his struggles didn't feel so heavy. Little did Daniel know, this simple act of kindness was the first step toward a transformation he could never have foreseen. As Daniel helped the old lady navigate the busy streets, he noticed how her steps were slow and cautious, each one seemingly taking more effort than the last. They finally reached a small, quiet neighborhood where she pointed toward an old but charming house with ivy climbing up its walls. She turned to him, her face softening with gratitude. "You've been a great help, Daniel," she said, her voice warm yet weary. "I don't know what I would have done without you today." Daniel shrugged, a faint smile crossing his face. "It's nothing, ma'am. Just glad I could help." "No, it's not nothing," she insisted, her gaze steady and kind. "In a world so full of indifference, you stop to help a stranger. That's rare, and it deserves to be recognized." She rummaged through her handbag, her frail hands trembling slightly as she pulled out a small velvet pouch. Holding it out to him, she said, "Take this. It's just a small token of my gratitude." Daniel hesitated, his pride tugging at him. "You don't need to give me anything, ma'am. Really, I didn't do it for a reward." But the old lady shook her head firmly. "Kindness must never go unrewarded. Please take it." Reluctantly, Daniel accepted the pouch. It felt light in his hand, and he opened it to find a simple golden coin inside. It wasn't particularly shiny or new, and to his untrained eye, it seemed like just an old keepsake. He looked up at her, puzzled. "It's a family heirloom," she explained. "It may not seem like much, but it holds great meaning to me. Keep it with you, and I hope it brings you some luck." Daniel nodded, though he didn't fully understand the value of the gesture. "Thank you," he said, slipping the pouch into his coat pocket. "But I think you're the one who deserves the luck." The old lady chuckled softly. "Perhaps we both do." With that, she gave him a final smile and disappeared behind the wooden door of her house. Daniel stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door, before turning to make his way back to the streets that had become his home. The walk back felt longer, the cold biting harder now that the moment of warmth had passed. Daniel reached his usual spot by the alley, sitting down on the same cold pavement as before. He pulled the velvet pouch from his pocket, studying the coin again. It looked old, maybe antique, but to him, it was just another trinket, a kind but impractical gift for someone in his position. With a sigh, he tucked it back into his pocket, dismissing it as nothing more than a sentimental gesture. His stomach growled again, reminding him of the hunger that had been his constant companion. He leaned back against the wall, trying to shut out the noise of the city and the ache in his body. The world moved on as it always did, indifferent to his struggles. But what Daniel didn't know was that the small gift he carried was about to change everything. It had been a week since Daniel had helped the old lady and received the small velvet pouch with the golden coin. Life on the streets hadn't changed. The cold nights were as brutal as ever, and hunger still gnawed at his insides. The coin remained tucked away in his coat pocket, a curious trinket that occasionally caught his attention, but held no immediate value to him. One evening, as Daniel sat in his usual spot near the bustling market square, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The sight was unusual in this part of the city, where luxury vehicles were rare. Daniel watched curiously as two well-dressed men stepped out. They looked around briefly before one of them walked directly toward him. "Are you Daniel?" the man asked, his tone polite but firm. Daniel blinked, startled. Yeah, that's me," he replied hesitantly. The man smiled slightly and handed him a sealed envelope. "This is for you." Daniel stared at the envelope, then back at the man. "There must be some mistake. I don't get mail." "No mistake," the man assured him. "You'll understand once you open it." Before Daniel could ask more questions, the two men got back into the car and drove away, leaving him holding the envelope. Confused and wary, he tore it open, revealing a thick card with elegant lettering. "You are cordially invited to the estate of Lady Eleanor Davenport. Transportation has been arranged. Please be ready at 6 p.m. tomorrow." Daniel read the message over and over, his mind racing. Lady Eleanor Davenport. The name meant nothing to him, yet the invitation was clear. Who was she, and why was he being summoned to her estate? The following evening, Daniel hesitated as the same black car arrived to pick him up. His coat was patched and frayed, his shoes scuffed, and he felt out of place even before stepping into the car. Yet curiosity won out, and he climbed in, clutching the velvet pouch in his pocket for reassurance. The journey took him far from the city, through winding roads lined with tall trees. Finally, the car pulled into a grand estate, its sprawling gardens illuminated by golden lights. Daniel stepped out, awestruck by the opulence surrounding him. Inside the estate, a butler escorted him to a grand hall where Lady Eleanor awaited. As she turned to greet him, Daniel's breath caught. It was the old lady he had helped a week ago, though she now carried herself with the regal poise of someone accustomed to grandeur. "Daniel," she said warmly, "I see you accepted my invitation." I don't understand," he stammered. "Who are you?" She smiled, her eyes twinkling. "Eleanor Davenport, Duchess of Ainsworth. The coin I gave you wasn't just a gift. It's a symbol of my family's legacy. You showed kindness when you had nothing, and that deserves recognition." Daniel's mind reeled as he realized the coin was not just sentimental, but an emblem of immense wealth and power. In that moment, the door to an entirely new world opened before him, a world where his life was about to change forever. The grand estate before Daniel was unlike anything he had ever seen. Towering spires reached for the sky, intricate carvings adorned the walls, and golden light spilled from crystal chandeliers inside the massive windows. For a man who had spent years on the cold, unforgiving streets, it felt like he had stepped into a dream or a fairy tale. Daniel was led by a butler through a series of halls lined with oil paintings, marble statues, and velvet drapes. Each corner of the palace exuded wealth and history. Yet, instead of feeling awe, Daniel felt out of place, painfully aware of his ragged coat and worn-out shoes. The velvet pouch in his pocket seemed insignificant in such grandeur. Finally, he was brought to a massive banquet hall filled with finely dressed guests. Their laughter and chatter quieted as Daniel entered, every eye turning toward him. Whispers rippled through the crowd, their curious gazes fixed on the man who clearly did not belong. At the far end of the room, sitting on a throne-like chair, was the old lady he had helped, the one he had known as a frail and struggling woman. But now she was resplendent in an elegant gown, a diamond-studded tiara resting lightly on her silver hair. She looked every bit the royal figure her surroundings suggested. "Daniel," she called, her voice echoing warmly through the hall. She rose to her feet, her presence commanding yet kind. "Please come closer." Hesitant but driven by curiosity, Daniel stepped forward, his heart pounding. As he approached, she gestured for him to stop before her. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, addressing the room, "allow me to introduce Daniel, a man whose kindness and humanity shine brighter than the finest jewels in this room." Daniel blinked, stunned by her words. I know you're wondering why he is here, she continued, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. A week ago, I found myself lost and vulnerable on the streets of the city, disguised and far from home. In that moment, it was this man, who had nothing to his name but his decency, who stopped to help me. Murmurs of surprise filled the hall as she turned back to Daniel. You see, Daniel, I am Eleanor Davenport, Queen of Ainsworth, and this palace is my home. That coin I gave you is a symbol of my family's legacy, representing the values we hold dear: compassion, courage, and kindness. Daniel's breath caught as the gravity of her words sank in. He instinctively reached into his pocket and pulled out the golden coin, now understanding its significance. Your selfless act, the Queen said, her voice steady and sincere, reminded me that greatness lies not in wealth or power, but in the simple acts of goodness we show one another. तुमने बिना किसी लालच के मेरी मदद की, और हमारी लेगेसी ये ही है कि काइंडनेस को रिवॉर्ड दिया जाए. She stepped closer, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. Today, Daniel, I reward your kindness. From this moment on, you will never go hungry or cold again. You will be given a home, a purpose, and the respect you so deeply deserve. The crowd erupted into applause, but Daniel could barely process it. He stood frozen, overwhelmed by the surreal moment. The woman he had thought to be just another struggling soul was, in reality, a queen, and she had chosen to honor him, a homeless man, for a simple act of humanity. For the first time in years, Daniel felt seen, truly seen. And as the Queen embraced him lightly, he knew his life had changed forever. In the days following the grand revelation, Daniel's life transformed in ways he could never have imagined. The Queen's promise wasn't merely words. It was a commitment that brought about a complete shift in his circumstances. He was moved into a beautifully furnished home on the royal estate grounds, complete with warm bedding, a fully stocked kitchen, and a closet filled with new clothes. For the first time in years, Daniel slept in a bed, free from the cold pavement and the relentless hunger that had defined his life. The Queen also ensured that he was financially secure. A royal stipend was arranged, giving Daniel the means to not only sustain himself, but to explore opportunities he had once thought impossible. He was also offered a role within the royal household, not as a servant, but as an advisor on community outreach programs. Despite the luxury and respect that now surrounded him, Daniel remained deeply connected to his humble roots. He knew what it felt like to be invisible, ignored by a world too busy to care. Instead of indulging in his newfound comfort, he sought ways to give back. Daniel began spending his days working closely with the Queen's charity initiatives, focusing on homelessness and poverty. His first-hand experience made him uniquely equipped to understand the struggles of those on the streets. He frequently visited shelters, spoke to individuals who had fallen on hard times, and used his influence to create programs that provided not only immediate relief, but also pathways to long-term stability. I've been where you are, he would say to the people he met, and I'm proof that with a little kindness and opportunity, things can change. He never forgot the small acts of generosity that had helped him survive during his darkest days, like the shopkeeper who occasionally gave him leftover bread, or the stranger who had once handed him a warm blanket. Those memories kept him grounded, reminding him that even in the harshest of times, humanity still held the power to shine through. Daniel's humility also extended to his interactions with the royal family and the elite circles he now found himself a part of. While he was respected for his insights and admired for his resilience, Daniel never sought to erase his past. Instead, he embraced it, often sharing his story to inspire others. At a charity gala hosted by the Queen, Daniel gave a heartfelt speech. Kindness saved my life. It was one small act, from someone who could have easily walked away, that gave me hope when I had none. If we all choose to see each other not as strangers, but as fellow human beings, imagine the change we could create. Daniel's transformation was not just about his own life improving. It became a symbol of the ripple effect of kindness. His story inspired countless others, leading to an outpouring of generosity and compassion across the kingdom. Shelters received record donations, volunteers flocked to aid the homeless, and the community grew stronger as people began to see the value in helping one another. As Daniel walked through the streets of the city where he had once struggled, he felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the Queen's generosity, but for the chance to remind the world of the power of simple human decency. His journey from a forgotten soul to a respected figure stood as a testament to the idea that kindness, no matter how small, could change lives, and in turn, the world. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the royal gardens in hues of gold and crimson. Daniel stood near a quiet fountain, watching the water ripple as the evening breeze played with its surface. It had been months since his life had changed so dramatically, yet the memories of his struggles still lingered like a shadow, a reminder of how far he had come. Footsteps interrupted his thoughts. He turned to see the Queen, Lady Eleanor, walking toward him, her regal grace softened by a warm, grandmotherly smile. Despite her stature, she had always treated Daniel not as someone beneath her, but as an equal, someone she respected deeply. "Good evening, Daniel," she said, her voice carrying the same kindness that had first drawn him to her that fateful day. "You seem lost in thought." Daniel smiled faintly. "Just thinking about how different my life is now. It feels surreal." The Queen nodded, standing beside him as they both looked at the fountain. "Change often feels that way. But it's your strength and character that brought you here. Never forget that." Daniel hesitated before speaking, his voice filled with sincerity. "I don't think I've ever properly thanked you, Your Majesty. What you did for me, it changed everything." She turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "And I could say the same to you, Daniel. That day, you could have walked away. You had no reason to help me, no expectation of reward. Yet you did, simply because it was the right thing to do. It reminded me of a truth we so often forget. Sometimes, the choices we make define the destiny we create." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of her words settling over them. Then she added, "Your kindness, small as it may have seemed, created a ripple that changed both our lives. That is the power of compassion." Daniel's gaze dropped to the golden coin in his hand, a symbol of that moment of kindness that had changed his destiny. He clenched it tightly, a wave of emotion washing over him. "You're right," he said softly. "I just didn't know it at the time." The Queen chuckled lightly. "Most of us don't. Life has a way of revealing its meaning when we least expect it." As they began to walk back toward the palace, the Queen glanced at him with a twinkle in her eye. "You know, Daniel, I think of you as more than just someone I helped. You're my friend. A rare kind, one who reminds me that even in my position, I still have much to learn about humanity." Daniel was taken aback, but smiled. "And you've taught me that even the smallest acts of kindness can ripple into something far greater." The video fades to Daniel standing on a bustling city street, handing a warm meal to a homeless man seated on the same cold pavement where he once sat. As he places a hand on the man's shoulder, he whispers, "You're not invisible. Remember, kindness can change everything." The scene cuts to the Queen watching from a distance, her face lit with pride. The final words echo in Daniel's voice. "Sometimes the choices we make define the destiny we create." The screen fades to black, leaving the audience with a powerful reminder of the transformative power of compassion.